week 8. So we're at spring break and we're over half done. We just have 7 weeks left. Okay. It's Wednesday, March 4th. Introduction to computers. OSI model, we took a look at that briefly. Layers 1, 2, and 3. A little bit about protocols. Talked a little bit about address resolution. And we got our first start at router configurations. So students, we should be getting to the point to where we can identify the layers: transport, session, presentation, application, and then be able to identify the layers using TCP/IP model. I told the students pretty soon we should be able to, I'll just give them a piece of paper and they'll fill it all in. We talked about this access, like network access layer here. That kind of covers both of these. You have a PC connects a switch connects the router. At this point in the router, the addressing to get it to the PC here is at the data link layer. And if it's Ethernet, the protocol, then we're using a physical address, MAC address. Now we did talk about ARP briefly, where the computer address resolution protocol, where the computer has to, if you're using a MAC address, let's say to get to another PC here, if you're using, you would use a MAC address to do that, but to actually ping these two, you would ping the IP address. The computer would do an ARP to get the MAC address, so the switch then would know which port to send it out of. Now if you're traveling to anything beyond here, that MAC address would be taken off at this level, and then it's re-encapsulated as it moves from the router, and in this case, here to another router. Talked a little bit about routes. This router would create a default route out, and later on we'll need a static route in to get to this network. Let me highlight that again. Right? So if I drew a line here, more on this in a minute, this would be a network, and then this would be a separate network. Right? Let's take a look at that more closely, or at least an example here. In this case, router's connected to this switch. If we were talking about a particular address like this, the 24 prefix bits would indicate these 3 octets, and then this last group right here we would refer to as interface or the host. We're going to start using the term interface more and more because that's what we're actually talking about. We're talking about the addressing on the interface. Example would be a laptop. Laptop could really have 2 interfaces, right? Wi-Fi and then a wired solution. The PCs in the labs, okay, we connect a PC on this network here. We could connect it wired, but we also could connect it to Wi-Fi. Here would be an example of this scenario here. connected wider, or we could connect to an access point. Okay, then we took a look. The students put a workstation on the switches, which are connected to the multi-layer switch. We had all those switches connected, which then eventually connected out through a router to the firewall, and then firewall. All this eventually goes to the internet. So we did some examples. We actually had 2 PCs on here. I had one in front. Students had one there in their groups. Another thing that we did, we had routers in these particular devices, and we made groups, and the students signed up for the groups, and they started the basic configs on the routers. Then after we did that, we connected switches, and we used this second number for the switch. This is switch 1, 2, this one's switch 10 by device numbers also. Then we took those and we connected those switches to the router. Now let's take a look at that scenario. So students did the basic configurations to the routers. Then they took the switches that already were configured. Let's say switch 1, device 1, and this router was device 21. So they moved the connection to the router, okay, and this switch addressing was 192, 168, 101 dot maybe 2. I don't remember for sure. Okay, but then inside this switch we also had a default gateway, which should point at a routing device, and that would be 192, 168, 101, 1. So now if we want this switch to talk to this router, that should be the IP address right there on this router. Now, after spring break, we'll talk about this connection going out eventually, going to the internet. But for right now, we want to make sure we had this connection. Now, we already had PCs connected, and they had connectivity already. So then, to make sure that this connection was working, okay, if you configured that default gateway to here, and if the router was configured correctly, a PC should be able to telnet to the router. You should be able to telnet to the router. And how you would do that is you would enter an address on the router, like the default gateway here. So this PC, if it telnetted to here, and if the router was configured correctly, they should have been able to telnet into the router. And that is where we ended up. Some key things to be working on: packet tracers, chapter 9, you want to finish those up. You want to be going through chapter 10. Actually, you could wait on that. We should finish this up this week and then take spring break off if you can. I don't know if you're behind in anything. And then get back on Monday and Wednesday. We're going to work on chapter 10, and we'll also review chapter 8 and 9. Probably have some type of evaluation on Wednesday on those two chapters. All right. Have a nice spring break. All right.